So we usually couple ground rules, guys, for the new people that are here. There is two separate buttons. There's a Q&A button and a chat button. The Q&A button is for everyone. So usually we do some Q&A at the end of the webinars here. Feel free to use that Q&A box to kind of raise your hand, throw in questions as they come up. Sometimes we have a ton of questions. Sometimes we have very minimal questions. So, uh, these webinars can last as long as 35 minutes. They can be an hour sometimes. So it just depends on how many questions we have as we go through those. I know Marco has a little bit of a hard stop at the top of the hour here. So we'll try to get through everything if we do have an abundance of questions that come in. But today's webinar, we're going to talk a little bit about what's in the fund. So we'll talk about promissory notes, what's in Norada Capital Management, what companies are in Norada Capital. But we're going to do a specific focus today on e-commerce businesses. That's a big portion of Norada Capital Management. So we'll talk about kind of the how and the why behind these businesses, the story behind them, which I think is a unique story. And then we'll talk about a little bit about that business model, that Marco has put together with Raj. But it's a very lucrative space, right? And it's a great space to be in, as you guys know. You've seen this industry grow over the years. So at this point, guys, so sorry, we had someone questioned in here.
The link
I'm not sure what he means by that. He said the link in the email not worked, but the text message link worked. Okay. Thank you for the update there, Gina. We'll see who else comes on, but a little bit of background, guys. So my name's Nate Hall. You've probably spoken with me before if you're someone who's been on these before. We send these out to quite a few of our clients here. So if we have spoken to you, great. Good to see you on here. Always raise your hand. We love to see people say hello here. I've been with Marco 3 or 4 years now. I've watched Norada Capital Management grow and expand, and I've seen these companies really flourish and take off. It's been quite impressive to watch kind of the 3 business pieces in the foundation of Norada Capital grow. I've also worked on the brokerage side with Norada Real Estate Investments. So I've helped hundreds of investors buy thousands of rental properties over the past decade. I've worked around the private money space, the private money lending, the hard money space. And this is something I'm pretty well versed in and been in it for a long time. So a little bit about myself there. I don't want to, toot my own horn too long. So I'm going to give over to Marco here and give him 30 seconds. Marco could talk an hour on his accomplishments over the past, 20, 30 years, but he's been an investor for a really long time, and someone who's, I meant look to as a mentor, and I've, watched him grow, and he supported me as well. So Marco, if you want to take maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes to talk about, your background for those of us who have never been on here, that would be ideal.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I appreciate everything you said, and don't underplay your contributions and your knowledge and your skill. You've been in this space for a long time with events and selling real estate and all that kind of stuff too. For me, just briefly, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been my whole life. I got involved in real estate investing at the age of 18. And then just pursued it for many years, and then really went full time into real estate in 2003, but invested in pretty much every asset class since, from oil and gas to cannabis to crypto to you name it. Yep. Most of my time has been spent in the real estate space, and still is to this day, because 20 years ago we started Norada Real Estate Investments, and that's kind of one of the leading providers of turnkey investment property, rental property in the U.S. So still humming along on year 20 and going on to 21. Norada Capital is a private equity firm I started 4 years ago. Think of it as an investment fund because it allows you to invest in our company. So think of it like an investment fund where you can invest using promissory notes, which is just a debt investment. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it gives you a really good yield of 12 or 15%. So Norada Capital is something that we've been building, growing, scaling, if you will, for the last 3.5, 4 years. And what we have inside it is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And it's really made up of some e-commerce businesses, some what I call educational masterminds, and a little bit of real estate and a media company, but predominantly it's made up of the e-com and mastermind businesses. So anyway, that's 30 or 60 seconds on me, Nate.
No, we appreciate that, Marco. And again, if you guys ever want to kind of look at the backstory as well, Marco has a great website, not just a real estate estate website, but just marcosanarelli.com lists out, his what he invests in, what he owns, his background there. And we can use actually, if you want to give me access to the chat box as well, Marco. I know I'm
Oh,
not I'm a panelist here, so if you
yeah,
want to make me like a co-host, I can put some different links in there as we go along. So
perfect.
guys, if you see me clicking around or looking around, that just means while Marco talks, sometimes I'll pull up a link to something. I'll put that link in the chat box. So keep an eye on the chat box as well.
Yeah.
Um, so I tend to put things in there just to focus on, you know, what we're talking about in that moment. So um, I will be clicking around and moving around sometimes. So that's just, if you guys are wondering what I'm doing, that's what I'm doing. So Marco, moving forward with kind of today's topics and what we're doing, in terms of Norada Capital Management, we do like to start out usually every week. It's like a broken record. We do like to hit on what a promise or note is. You have probably the best simplistic, version of the elevator pitch I ever heard on what a promise or note is, and then what's in our actual fund. So let's start with the promise note itself, if we could. Like I love that simple definition that you use, and then we'll talk about what backs the promissory note, and then we'll veer into some focus on the e-commerce space itself. I think that's a good breakdown to go with. And again, guys, if you have questions, there's a Q&A box you can click on, and then if you keep an eye on the chat box, I'll be working to put some links in that chat box as we go through some things here. So kicking off, Marco, with a promissory note, your definition there. For those of you who have never invested in a credit offering or a promissory note, do you want to start there, please, with what that is?
Yeah, so it's very simple. A promissory note is just the name given to a loan agreement. It's very
Yep.
common. You've seen it. You've probably signed many of them over the years and not even really paid attention to the title of it. Sometimes it's just referred to as a note, but a promissory
Mhm.
note is nothing more than a loan agreement. It's got two parties, a borrower and a lender. And the note or the agreement simply defines the terms, the start date, the end date, the and what the repayment is, the
Yeah.
payment of interest. Usually it's interest that can be paid on a particular schedule, monthly, quarterly, annually. It could be a balloon payment at the end. But if you're familiar with a signature loan, a car loan, a student loan, um, what else? What am I missing? Oh, and most loans are basically drafted on a promissory note. Even a mortgage loan is technically a promissory note. It's just a thicker, more substantial document. They often refer to it as a mortgage loan, or it'll say loan agreement, but it's a promissory note. And that's all it is. So it defines the terms between two parties. And I will take that one step further and just say that promissory notes are not only used by institutions and individuals, but companies often use them to raise capital. So if a company's raising capital, they're either selling equity, meaning shares, and then they're raising capital that way, or they're raising capital in the form of debt, which they'll repay over a period of time. And they use a promissory note as the investment instrument, the paper instrument that they use in order to raise that capital. So it's used by companies all the time, every day around this country and any first world country for that matter.
Yeah, and for those of you who are real estate investors listening to this call, if you've ever done rehabs or wholesales and you've borrowed money from family or friends or from a hard money lender, that loan you have between to the two parties is a promissory note, right? It's that simple. And it's interesting when I talk to a lot of newer investors who have never done something like this. Um, they've never heard of promissory notes or invested, in this way. It's very, very common. It's not, especially in our world, it's very common, Marco. We're used to it, right?
Yeah.
12%, 12% is hard money rates, right? It's private, sometimes it's private money rates. So we're used to higher yields in the private money world, in the note world. So for those of you who are, not used to seeing double digit returns in this, in any type of investment, if you're used to ETFs or you're used to stocks, bonds, T-bills, things like that, you're probably used to those yields in the 6 to 9%. 12 to 15% fixed is not uncommon in our space. So I am going to do one thing real quick, Marco, in the chat box. You kind of gone into what a promissory note is. We haven't talked about the actual returns and the offering. So we'll go into that next in terms of the yields, but I did put a link to everyone in the webinar chat where you can click on a Google Drive to continue through the fund investor slide deck, which will show you the actual interest rates and the returns. We'll talk about there in just a second, but you can have a copy of that to work through. It talks about our companies. It has our partners in there. It has our companies in there. You'll see some, at the very bottom of there, you'll see some frequently asked questions, client testimonials, things like that. So it's a great document for you to have. If you're on this webinar, you should have gotten a copy of that already, but it may have ended up in your spam folder. We don't know. So that's in there. So Marco, we defined beautifully as always what a promissory note is: a simple loan agreement between two parties. Can we talk about the terms, the interest rates, just to knock that off the bat here, so people know what the investment looks like before we get into the actual companies, what backs the note?
Yeah, I mean, if we're just talking about the rates of return, it's either 12% or 15%. I know we're not showing a slide like we sometimes do, but there's really just two rates of return. An
Yep.
investment up to 100,000 is 12% per year, paid monthly, and an investment of 100,000 and above is 15% per year, again, paid monthly, just an ACH, or what they call a direct deposit into your account, whether it be a self-directed account or whether it's you know, a checking account, savings account. It doesn't matter what it is, business account, as long as it's a US based bank account or an account of some kind, we can send funds to it. But that's
Correct.
12 or 15%. And there's a bonus rate. If you're an investor at 200,000 and above, there's also a 5% bonus on the maturity of the note, which is repaid when the note matures. So it's principal plus that 5% bonus. And that's just to incentivize investors to come in, maybe not initially at 200,000. They might come in at 50 or 100, and then they add to it, or they get another note, and then you reach a 200,000 plus, and that's it.
Perfect. And so yeah, we're what's called a 506c Reg D offering, guys. So the terms you choose are between 3 and 7 years. Typically, you have to be what's called an accredited investor to invest in the fund, right? So it's not our regulation; it's an SEC rule. That means you either have an income of 200,000 for the previous 2 years individually, $300,000 combined with your spouse, or you have a net worth of $1 million plus. It doesn't have to be all those things. It could be either or, either income approach, or it can be net worth. We need to get what's called a letter of accreditation from you to move forward with the investment. We'll go over this in the end as well. But as far as picking that term between 3 and 7 years and getting that 12 to 15%, we do have to have an accredited investor pool. So yeah, super simple, guys. 12 or 15% annually, paid out monthly. Easy math. Let's say, for example, $100,000 investment happens. That's $15,000 per year. That's $1,250 a month back to you, whether it's your self-directed IRA, your business, your LLC, something like that. That's a breakdown of a basic example. And again, we'll cover this at the end as well. So the other minor thing to hit on is that there's a minimum term and a minimum investment. So the minimum investment is 50K. The minimum term is 3 years. Okay. So with that, Marco, do you want to go straight into ecom, or do you want to do a quick 5-minute overview of the different categories and then go into ecom?
Let's do a 2-minute overview of the different categories. Really, there's two main ones.
There you go.
As I briefly mentioned before, Norada Capital invests in different business ventures. Like, often we are a major shareholder. Sometimes I'm a board advisor or board member. Some of them are startups that I've been a co-founder in, which is the case with our mastermind, educational mastermind businesses, which are made up of three in particular. Well, two masterminds, but three companies. There's the Money Is Mastermind, which we started over a year ago, almost 2 years ago. Level Up Real Estate Mastermind, and then members are funneled into those two masterminds through a monthly event we put on, a major event called Aspire. It's the Aspire Tour that we put on every single month in a different major city. We just finished Miami a few weeks ago. We have Orlando coming in less than 10 days. And we typically have 2,000 to 3,000 plus people at these events. Sometimes it's close to 4,000, but we're averaging probably around 3,200. And so, that these are profit centers. Aspire is becoming, it's being retooled into a profit center, so that way we're making money on the top end, not just on the back end with Money Is and Level Up. So we'll have profit from front to back. Actually, I had a meeting with my partners this morning about 2024 and how we're turning Aspire into a very profitable, probably the most profitable venture of the three. But those are the educational mastermind businesses that we're involved in, and that I'm partner. And when I say I don't mean me personally, I mean Norada Capital. And so that's an interesting part. That's become a significant portion of Norada Capital's balance sheet or assets under management, if you will. The other significant portion is what we're talking a little bit more about today is the e-commerce businesses. And the e-commerce businesses are pretty exciting because a lot of what we've, let's just say, acquired and rebuilt or started to rebuild are well-known name brand businesses. And this makes up the other significant portion of Norada Capital. And it's pretty exciting. The story is pretty interesting. What we've been able to
Yeah.
accomplish, I take no credit for it. It was one of my business partners, but it was his brainchild, and I thought it was pretty cool how we started off going in one direction and ended up acquiring some pretty amazing name brand assets. But our goal is to increase the valuations of these businesses, so we have some sort of exit or liquidation event within the next 1 to 3 years. That's potentially taking it public. There's certain things that we've discussed here in the recent past, like last week or two, about opening up strategically located stores for some of these brands, which will just
Yep.
draw a lot of media attention. So, but those are the two main categories, and really those are the two that are really worth talking about because the tiny real estate component and the media business, which is based on Pickleball, it's into Pickleball Media Company, which is a magazine, but it's really an online portal, a membership portal, which is officially launching here real soon. Will be a valuable company as well, but it's dwarfed by everything else we're doing on the mastermind and e-com space. So those are the categories if you want to talk about it categorically. And Nate, if you want to drill down into anything, let me
But
know.
yeah,
But
the one last thing to mention as well is just Broadway, right? That's another category there, right? Within neurotic capital management. So
yeah, and I wasn't forgetting it. I just figured, it's also
yeah,
like a relatively small piece, but one that
sure.
you and I both love very, very much. So yeah, Norada Capital is involved in co-producing multiple theatrical productions. Most of them are based on Broadway. Two of them are actually on the West End in London. But yeah, Norada Theatrical Productions is the subsidiary of Norada Capital that is involved in those productions. And so with the Tonys, actually, might as well mention it. Tonys are coming up in less than a month. It's less than a month. So four of our productions have been nominated for a Tony Award. So that's going to be kind of interesting to see what
Yeah, it's
happens.
exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, good.
Hopefully we end up winning a Tony Award. Then we can say, hey, Norada Capital's I don't know, a recipient of a Tony Award for one
There
of
we
its
go.
productions.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, good guys, and we just before we dive into ecom, it is a great story, by the way. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understand kind of the backbone, like what's backing your investment, right? If you're going to put 50,000 or $100,000 into Norada capital management, what's backing that investment itself? And it's a myriad of companies, as we just talked about. Now, a big portion of those companies are e-commerce businesses. So let's dive in here, Marco. I know that it's a great story. I always send out to my clients the webinar you did with Raj a few months ago as well, right? Raj is one of your main business partners in the e-commerce side. So it gives you a little bit more detail there. But I guess we'll start with the story behind e-commerce, right? Maybe, what sparked that, the first e-commerce business that was acquired, and then how it kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, this is a very interesting story, and it's one that people that haven't heard it before kind of are taken back a little bit. It's like with,
Yeah.
I see some people listening to me with their jaw open, not realizing their jaw is open because they're hearing this story. So, a couple of a small investment group I was part of about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was 2019. We kind of started venturing out into building new launches in the e-com space. It was what they were experts at. They've made a lot of money in the e-com space. One of my partners, Alex, at the time, just had an exit from one of the companies he founded or co-founded with his partner called Zeusk. It may still be the third largest dating site in the world, but Zeusk or Zeus.com, whatever you want to call it, was one of his brainchilds, and he had a $300 million exit on that. They took it public, and they, had a very good payday on that day, in terms of what they were able to sell the company for. But they're my two partners at the time, their expertise was e-com, building and scaling businesses online. So our plan at the time as investors is just coming together and pooling our funds and building. At the time, the concoction, the idea we had is like, let's start one a month. And we had one going at the time, which has become, a pretty good cash cow called MentorBox. MentorBox.com is kind of like an audiobook summary, but a video version of it. But it's kind of like one step up where, we actually sit down with the authors and have a video interview, and they provide more video content. It's not just somebody summarizing a book. So it's a really cool idea. And, it had a good ramp up. And then, with everything else we were working on, it kind of still existed, but we spent less time on it, and we weren't creating more and more new content. So now we're going back the other way and rebuilding and improving what we already have. But it's got, I don't forgot how many thousands of paying subscriber members right now. So the overhead is almost zero. But you have 10, whatever it is, however many tens of thousands of people paying $10 a month, it's pretty significant cash flow. So anyway, that was how we started out, in the e-com space. And then one of my partners had this idea of actually acquiring the intellectual property of a publicly traded company that filed for bankruptcy protection. And many of you will recognize the name. It's called Dress Barn. Dress Barn had stores all over the country. It was primarily women's apparel, and they had other stuff as well in the stores. Um, so they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy, and we went in and gave them an offer. It was a $5 million offer to purchase all their intellectual property. And that means that what we offered to buy was their customer database, all their subscribers, their website, the domain names they own, the brand and brand name of Dress Barn, and any trademarks that they own. So collectively, that's their IP, their intellectual property. So the board looked at it, and they were interested. And so they all signed off on it and said, yeah, we'd be willing to sell that to you. But of course, we had to wait for the auction to complete because it's a formal federal bankruptcy proceeding. So as long as there's no other competitor that comes to the auction, willing to outbid us, we basically became what's known as the stalking horse bidder. And so we were positioned to win that auction. And so the auction came along, and that's exactly what happened. Nobody showed up, and we were granted or gifted or uh, awarded, I guess, for our offer, all the IP. So we took Dress Barn, took it over, brought in our own team, continued running it online, merchandising it, working with the suppliers of the product, the apparel and whatever else. And it never had 1 minute of downtime. It was just instant continuation, but we rebuilt the site to improve its merchandising and how it presents product and sales and all that good stuff. There's a lot of science and art that's involved in a website.
Yeah.
So, and you're constantly changing it too. That's the important thing. But that model worked so well, that playbook that we created in acquiring Dress Barn, not the physical stores. The physical stores were closed as part of the bankruptcy. So the stores were closed, inventory was liquidated, and the staff were, laid off. But the online component is what we took over and continued to run from that day forward. So we created this playbook that worked so well that we thought, hey, let's just do it again. And we did it again. We went after multiple companies. We didn't get all the companies we tried to get, but the next one what we succeeded in getting was Pier 1. So many of you remember Pier 1 Imports. They had stores all over the country. They had a very, very well-established name and brand. Quality stuff, unique stuff available in all their stores and even online at pier1.com. So they, along with several hundred other brick and mortar retailers, were suffering from poor sales, bad sales, negative sales, just struggling and filing bankruptcy. So we went after Pier 1. We made them an offer. The offer that we made them was $21 million for their intellectual property. And they went back to their board and they discussed it with their C-level executives, and they ultimately accepted it. They signed off on it. But again, we have to go through the formal federal, auction portion of it. Someone did show up at that that auction, and I think they're called a Cerna, but they're a massive holding company of many retail stores that you'll see in the mall. And they ended up bidding it up. The increments, this was during COVID, and so it was done over Zoom, but the increments were $500,000 per bid. And so ultimately got bid up to 31 million, and then we had the final bid at 31.5 million, and we ended up winning. They stopped because they weren't prepared. They didn't do their due diligence and research on the potential, the traffic, and everything else needed to understand and know about Pier One or Pier One Online, pier1.com. So we took that over as well. It brought in our team, rebuilt the website, started new merchandising, continued the relationship with the suppliers of the Pure One products, and started building more connections. It was hard during that time, by the way, because it was COVID, and so there was a lot of supply chain constraints between China and other countries that were providing the U.S. with product. So stores everywhere of every kind were suffering, not just Pier One. So we had to focus more on US-based retailers or suppliers and manufacturers than we could internationally. But ultimately, we had enough product to sell. So those were the two biggest and main acquisitions. After Pier One, we acquired Linens and Things. Well, actually, those went hand in hand. So they were at the same time. So Dress Barn Pier One, Linens and Things. And then after that, I forget the exact order, but for those of you old enough to remember the Franklin Mint, that was a brand that we acquired that goes back decades. So if your parents definitely would recognize it. High-end collectibles, coins, really neat stuff as far as collectibles. Steinmart, I called it kind of like Walmart light. Steinmart had stores all over the country, but we acquired Steinmart and the Steinmart name. So we run Steinmart online as well.
Yeah.
And so that was another acquisition. And then some two boutique women's apparel uh, brands, Roland Moret and Ralph and Russo are two other brands that we acquired as well. I'm not sure what our long-term plans are for those at this point in time. We could sell those brands off and just turn a quick profit on those, or we can just build them and scale those as independent boutique women's apparel suppliers, retailers, manufacturers. Um, and then last but not least, there's two more. Modell's Sporting Goods, which was well known in the Northeast. Modell's was a big brand name for sporting goods, and now it's beyond sporting goods. It's more than that. And then what I call an 800 or 900-pound gorilla in the space is bodybuilding.com. I call that a 900-pound gorilla because bodybuilding.com receives 4.8 million visitors a month online, and it has very little to no marketing dollars put behind it. It has just such a significant footprint online that it receives tons and tons and tons of traffic. And although there is product being sold on the website and there is monetization going on, so there is revenue, it is completely untapped. What we can do in building bodybuilding.com is enormous. And so we're putting the executive team and the people in place to build, grow, and scale, not just bodybuilding.com, but all these business brands. So those were the acquisitions that we made and we own today. So everything I just described to you is held in our parent holding company called Omni. We just refer to it as Omnis for short, Omni Retail Enterprises. And Norada Capital is a equity owner partner, and to a lesser degree, I sit on the advisory board of Omni that holds and operates all these businesses. Each of these businesses are their own individual companies. They run completely independently of each other. They have their own P&Ls and books, but they're administered and managed by similar teams. There's a lot of overlap and cross-pollination for efficiency purposes between all these companies. So there's a lot shared in terms of operations, the executive team and the marketing team. And what we learn from one company, we can, cross-pollinate and share with the other company. So anything we're doing that works well from a marketing perspective, we obviously, share with every other business. Now, I will say, I can go on, but I will say that we have been working with a consultant by the name of Sharon. She is ex-CEO of a brand that you all know and love. You've heard of Vitamin Shop. There's stores all over the country.
Sure.
Vitaminshop.com is their online portion of it. Well, Sharon was the former CEO. We hired her for months now as our basically high-level consultant to help us. She's effectively our interim CEO to help us run and build and scale these businesses. She's got incredible ideas on kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about here today. She firmly believes that within 3 years or less, we can rebuild this into $1 billion plus enterprise. Um, I think that's a little bit on the conservative side. She's very clear in her vision to rebuild these brands. She's also got ideas to open up strategically located boutique stores like Pier Ones in different places that have a physical presence that brings back the foot traffic to the Pier One name. Those obviously are going to be in strategic locations that have high foot traffic and is conducive to retail sales. But she's got all these great ideas, and one of the ideas is just building some smaller Pier One stores and just leveraging the media attention that would get. Like the amount of attention from the media would be phenomenal, and that would just drive more traffic to the website and increase sales. It's just a brilliant idea. But she's full of great ideas, and she's excited to be ultimately our CEO. Right now, we just have her under contract. She's not officially hired. But we're having those conversations. So the valuations as we project them to be, we see this being $1 billion business again within 3 to 5 years, conservatively 5 years, very conservatively. Sharon believes we could do in less than 3. So what's the exit strategy for all these businesses? We don't know that definitively today. It could be taking one or more of these businesses back, as a publicly traded company, do an IPO or a reverse merger into a public shell company so we can have it listed right away, like on the public stock exchange. And then, Pier One or Dress Barn or Linens and Things will be a publicly traded company yet again, and we'll turn that into $1 billion business. So there's different ways to, generate profit from these businesses, not just from the cash flow that will grow and scale as the months and quarters and years go by, but also in terms of building its equity value and then ultimately profiting from that in whole or in part. That's just a strategic executive decision that we need to make here with Norada Capital is, whether we retain all the equity, sell some of it, liquidate some of it, take distributions. I mean, those are just things that we'll decide as the quarters and years go by. But our goal is obviously to grow and scale all these businesses, get them as profitable as possible, increase the multiples on those valuations, and then decide what to do, with these companies. Anyway, I'm going off on a tangent to some degree, but maybe I'll just pause right there, Nate, and see if you have any comments.
Yeah, I want to clarify a couple things from what you were saying, Marco, and also Ken. I saw that you raised your hand there. If you have a question, go ahead and put it in the Q&A box there, and we'll see that question come in. And Marco, you'd mentioned a couple different times billion-dollar businesses. Now, I want to be clear. You were talking about obviously someone that you would hire to help run the CEO portion. You're talking about several of these e-commerce businesses, or one or two of them, not just all the brands as a whole becoming billion-dollar businesses. You're talking about Pier One, bodybuilding, more than one of these e-commerce businesses. The evaluations of the goal is to turn them into billion-dollar businesses, correct?
There's one answer, but 3 parts to that. That's Nate. That's actually a really good question because I think about this at a level that I don't necessarily dumb it down or break it down. So first of all, collectively, Omni Retail Enterprises, which is the parent holding company of all these businesses, all these brands and businesses, the market valuation of Omni will ultimately be made up collectively of the valuations of each of these businesses. So it will reach the $1 billion threshold or mark first, that milestone first. as we continue to grow and scale the businesses within it, Pier 1 and bodybuilding.com, those two are kind of what I call the unicorns within Omni.
Yeah.
Those two will ultimately, at some point, call it 3 years, 5 years, even maybe 7 years from now, be billion-dollar businesses as well. So we'll have $2 billion businesses within the billion-dollar holding company. And
Yeah.
so I guess that's the short answer to your question about what is going to ultimately be a billion-dollar business. So first, it'll be Omni, because it collectively owns all these businesses. Norada Capital owns a good percentage of Omni, and then Pier 1 will at some point be a billion-dollar business, and bodybuilding will ultimately be a billion-dollar business. I have a feeling, I don't know how to articulate this or quantify it, but I have a feeling that bodybuilding.com will be the billion-dollar business first, over Pier 1, or potentially even Dress Barn. There's just so much potential. The reason for that is because online businesses can trade and be valued at multiples much higher than brick and mortar stores. Even though Pier 1 and Dress Barn are not brick and mortar stores today, it'll have an infusion of brick and mortar stores over the next 3 years. Um, it's just that scalable online businesses that have high margins can trade and be valued at multiples that are very high, whether you're measuring that against your top line revenue or your EBITDA, or even using profit, like however, whatever valuation model you want to use, you can get up to the 100 million, like the 9-figure valuation pretty damn quick.
Yeah.
We're seeing that right now with Money Is, and to a lesser degree Level Up and Aspire, but by the end of 2024, they should all be at that 9-figure mark.
Yeah. Love it. And I think that as we know in the e-commerce space, the online space, I mean, sometimes you get on the phone with clients, they'll talk about, they don't know a whole lot about that space, but even if you just get a slice of that pie, right? There's so many people shopping online. There's so many people that do online retail, that it's massively, the upside is massive, right? Um,
You want to
we
here's
had a
a
couple questions come Go
I
ahead.
related unrelated comment. I have I don't know where I put it. I have a copy of the Wall Street Journal from last week, and I couldn't stop but notice one of the headlines. I forgot the retailer, a major retailer in the US. Darn it, I can't remember who it is. I don't know where I put it. But they basically, they're saying that they've seen like 8 consecutive quarters of declining sales and revenue. And I'm thinking, man, there's just like, it's just one after another that these major retailers are suffering and failing because they just can't seem to make it in the real world, like the material brick and mortar world. A lot of retailers are having great success online, because you can control, grow, scale those businesses, control your costs. Your overhead is much lower, um, and more people are shopping online. I mean, everybody seems to go to Walmart.com, HomeDepot.com,
Yep.
Amazon.com. Even groceries now. Like my groceries come to my doorstep like all
Correct.
the time. I just order through Amazon Fresh. There's other options out there as well. And it's like, I don't even have to step foot in a grocery store anymore. It's just like, it's pick, pack, and shipped in a massive facility, by my house here, um, where you can't walk into. It's just a warehouse, but all they do is they just package groceries and deliver and drop it off. It's like,
Right.
it's awesome.
Right. Yeah, I think that ties in as well to, when you talk about the actual investment stuff, the note itself, people talk about 12 and 15% and how we're able to accomplish that. It's because we have high yield businesses, right? E-commerce, like you talked about, it's low overhead, higher yield. And one of the things that you haven't mentioned yet is these e-commerce businesses are operating debt free, right? So um, that only benefits us as Nordic Capital, and benefits you as the investor as well. We've had a pretty good questions that have come in, Mark. Do you want to take a left turn to some of these questions here, or
Oh
is there
yeah,
anything else you
I
want
didn't
to?
even Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
even notice them. Let me open up the Q&A. I had it closed. So,
James, you can ask Marco about the EGOT. That's a funny one there. He said, why not go for an EGOT? That was way before we were talking about the Tony Awards. So,
well, look,
um,
we'll take anything we can get. We'll take awards.
exactly.
Yeah. Actually, there are many other nominations. Not, I talk about the Tonys because they're the most well known and the largest.
Right.
If I go to my email, I can tell you all the other nominations that were made with other,
Sure.
other awards. We'll save that for another day when we talk about maybe
Yeah.
Broadway.
All right. Let's go to anonymous attendee. We seem to have an anonymous attendee almost every webinar. Can you please clarify again the relationship between Norada Capital and Omni? How does this affect how does this affect or is it important to us as investors? It's a good question. We can clarify that again for you.
Can you please clarify again the relationship between Norada Capital and Omni? How does this affect the import? Yeah, well, let's look at this structurally.
Mhm.
Um, so I'll give you the short story because there's actually a longer story that I don't think we have time for to go into like all the history. But essentially, it's this: Omni is just a Delaware corporation that holds 100% of the equity in all these businesses that we acquired. So rather than hold, you know, a percentage of equity in each of these individual entities, like Pier One, Dress Barn, Bodybuilding, Roland Moray, Steinmart, and all that, what we did is we rolled them all into one parent holding company. And then the investors who own equity in this portfolio of e-commerce businesses actually hold shares or equity just in Omni. So Norada Capital is one owner equity holder in Omni. Raj, through whatever my business partner, who's also a major investor, like we are in these brands, holds equity in Omni. So nobody technically owns equity in the companies themselves other than Omni itself. Omni is the holding company. And so we all own equity. Again, when I say we, I'm referring to Norada Capital. Norada Capital owns equity in Omni Retail Enterprises. Um, so that's just the structure, and there's reasons for that. It's there's tax reasons, there's capital raising reasons, there's growth and expansion reasons. There's just different strategic and tactical reasons to hold the structure that way. Um,
Yeah.
but it doesn't affect or change or impact you in any way. All you really need to know is that Norada Capital owns equity in all these businesses, but it's through this holding company.
Yeah. Good question there.
Yeah.
Uh, Ken asked, maybe this is too premature, but how could those who invest with Nordic Capital invest with individual companies like Pier1.com, bodybuilding.com, et cetera? It's a fair question. So he's talking about making the investment directly. You have to remember these are privately held companies, so they're not on the stock exchange at the moment where you can go and you can buy shares of Pier1.com or buy
Yeah.
shares of bodybuilding. But maybe you can speak a little bit more to that, Marco.
Yeah. So at this point in time, there's no way to be a direct investor or an equity investor in these brands like, Dress Barn, Pier One, Bodybuilding, or any of the others. Um, could that change in the future? Potentially. I mean, if we're looking to raise capital for whatever reason, for growth or expansion capital, we may have an offering for it. There isn't today, but I can't speak about tomorrow being, a week, a month, a quarter from now, or a year from now. I don't know. But we don't have an offering right now. We don't. Um, I guess the flip side of that is you can invest in them is in a way indirectly, not in the form of equity, but in the form of debt through Norada Capital, because Norada Capital is one of the principals, co-founders, and equity or stakeholders in those businesses. So you investing in Norada Capital indirectly and through debt, not equity, are investing in those because it's part of our
Right.
portfolio. It's the foundation that sits under Norada Capital that you are directly or indirectly tied to. So
Yeah.
maybe not the answer you wanted, because maybe you're thinking, oh, well, how can I invest in these, now that they're not new companies, but they're essentially early stage growth companies, as is pretty much everything in Norada Capital's portfolio. I mean, that's our focus as a company, is growth stage companies, that have high upside potential, equity wise, appreciation wise, if you will, valuation wise. So I know that's probably not what you want to hear, but there's no way to invest directly in them, just indirectly through Norada Capital.
Yeah. Thanks for the question there, Ken. Michelle Lewis, it will be a bit before we can be accredited. Would it be possible to partner with someone who is accredited in LLC and invest that way? The short answer to your question is that would be a question for your lawyer, right? We're not experts in the law, right? So you have to make sure you're abiding by SEC regulation. Now, do LLCs invest in the offering? Yeah, typically you can actually, an LLC can get a letter of accreditation, or the individuals with that LLC can get a letter of accreditation. But the first part of that would be connect with your lawyer to make sure that you're above board on that. And I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Marco. But
Yeah, I have three quick comments. Number one, if Nate mentioned an LLC, if you are a principal in an LLC that has an asset value,
yeah,
in other words, a net worth in personal terms, but a valuation of 5 million or more, it's by default accredited. That entity is an accredited entity, and it doesn't matter whether you are or not. So 5 million is the magic number when it comes to a business like an LLC or anything else. Number two is if you're referring to a partner as in like a spousal partner, someone you live with, it's like you and another person, male or female, whatever. If your partner's accredited and you are partners, like for example, in marriage, you're by default accredited too. You guys share in that accreditation status. Number three, we'll just say off the record, I'm just telling you what I've seen other people do. I'm not telling you to do this. I do know there have been some investors who were not accredited that have partnered without our knowledge with an accredited investor. The accredited investor was the investor that invested with us. It wasn't the non-accredited investor, but they had their own deal in the background that we were not privy to or part of. Between them, their own agreement, their own relationship, their own whatever. But we were only dealing with that one accredited investor who proved themselves to be accredited. And that's okay with us if we're dealing with an accredited investor. What they do behind the scenes is not our business. That's up to them and their business, but we don't need to know about it, don't want to know about it. And again, not legal or financial advice. This is just what I've heard other investors do in the past.
good question, Michelle. Thank you.
Yeah.
Nancy says, how are these brands advertised? Social media ads. I used to shop at Pier 1, had no idea they were still around. Is there quite a bit of money spent on online ads? It's funny you say that, Nancy, as well. I actually, as an example, I put pier1.com in the chat box. So anybody who accesses the chat, which should be everyone here, can see the example of pier1.com on that. You can buy product there right now if you want. I have clients ask me all the time, wait, I can actually buy a product through Pier 1. Yeah, absolutely. Go to their website. You can buy a product on Pier 1.
Yeah, and let me say this. Take a minute and go to pier1.com or dressbarn.com or bodybuilding.com or steinmart.com and take a look at what we're doing. It's impressive. The quality of the design and layout and merchandising on the site is top shelf, it's world class. And we intend to keep it that way. We have a substantial team on payroll that we pay every month to grow, scale, and operate these businesses, to merchandise and keep the engine humming, because we have traffic every day, we have sales every day, and our goal is to continue to increase that traffic, increase the sales, increase the profitability, increase the amount of inventory that we hold. Most of our product is drop shipped from the suppliers and manufacturers. But as we continue to become more profitable, we have the profit to reinvest, the capital to reinvest in more inventory. We can buy more inventory that we can actually pick, pack, and ship ourselves that have higher margins than what we're actually making from product that's being drop shipped from suppliers and manufacturers. So our goal is not to inventory everything. Our goal is to have more inventory of product that we know we can turn over, especially seasonal stuff, for Christmas or Halloween or Thanksgiving or all that stuff. There's certain things that you want to have on hand because they'll sell and it has a high turnover. And if you inventory your own product, you have higher margins. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're selling have profit margins of 30, 40, 50%, which is fantastic. But there are products that you can buy in bulk and warehouse and sell that can have 100% margins or more. Like some of the margins on this stuff is crazy. So, but you have to have enough of it. So, this is one of the reasons why we continue to raise capital. It's primarily to continue to grow and scale our mastermind businesses, our educational masterminds, because we're very close to a tipping point where we're going to have these rockets in orbit. That's going to happen by the end of this year. But same thing with the e-com businesses. We for every dollar that we take in investment capital, we can turn that dollar around very quickly because we can just get inventory that we know will sell, and we can turn it around, and that just means, bottom line profit. At least a 50% margin on that. So that's a pretty whopping big return when you can take in a dollar and in a short period of time turn that into $1.50. That's pretty good.
Good question there, Nancy. Um, Ken talked about, so I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Ken, but how do you invest in Omni? I think that's referring to a different question that was before,
Yeah.
referring to shares and whatnot. So maybe you can speak to that, Marco.
Well, it's what we talked about, like whatever, 15 minutes ago or something, but there is no way to invest in Omni directly. If you're investing in Norada Capital, you are indirectly investing in Omni and everything else that we have as far as our portfolio of assets or businesses on the books. So, so if your question is about how do I invest in shares or in equity in Omni, it's just not an option. It's a privately held company. It's our holding company that holds all these assets that we acquired like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think I answered Ken. So I appreciate that.
Good question, Ken.
Yeah.
And then do you want to hit on that last question, Marco? It's just a question that really has nothing to do with the investment piece there, but
Yeah. You
someone's
know what?
curious about the name
You know
Norada,
what?
which
I
I,
like
I
the,
explain this all the time. Yeah.
I don't know if you
So
know the
we're
story.
going to end the webinar here in just a second, guys,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
we're going to answer
We'll
this
end it.
question and then we'll talk about something here
Yeah,
shortly. So go ahead, Mark.
we'll end it on this. I'll give the short story on this because it's kind of an interesting story. And Nate, I think you know the story, but let me just
I
share
do.
it. You do? Okay.
Yeah.
I think you actually asked me this question. So anonymous attendee, man, I don't know who this is. Every week I have anonymous attendee. Um, so the question is, where did the name Norada come from? Okay, I get asked this about once every 2 months. Many years ago, in my younger years, when I was building a business with my best friend Rob back in Calgary, Canada, um, we had a meeting with a company back then that it still exists today. And they were one of the first companies to create an online platform, an online portal, or in the cloud app. Back then, in the cloud apps didn't exist. They were one of the first. They basically created Outlook, or like basically your calendar, Gmail, and everything else all together in the cloud. And it was an amazing system. It was beautiful. But their company was called Norada Corp. And I asked them the exact same question, like, what does Norada mean? How'd you come up with this name Norada? And they basically told me the story. They said, look, we needed a name for our company. We wanted it to be a good, solid, brandable, impactful name. So they brainstormed, they as in their partners, because we were meeting with the two owners. So it was Rob and myself and the two owners. And they came up with 100 names. They brainstormed 100 potential names for the company. And they submitted this list of 100 names to a psychological review. I don't know who it was, or if it was a company or a psychologist or the university. I don't know. But they basically took all these 100 names and they ranked them in order of the ones that had the highest psychological impact. And Norada, Norada, came out first on this list of 100 as the most psychologically impactful name for whatever reason or however that works. And I thought, what a brilliant thing to do, to come up with a name for a company and actually, do the research to see what has the most impact on a person's psyche. And I filed that in the back of my head. It was so unique and revolutionary. So in 2003, I needed a name for Norada real estate investments, and everything I looked up, the domain name was taken. I couldn't find a name that didn't exist already. And I thought, you know what? I need something that's unique, brandable, solid, impactful, and something I can market. And I thought, what about Norada? So I started checking Norada real estate. It's available. Norada real estate investments is available. Norada everything I looked up was available. And so, you know what? I just registered the domain names with Norada, and I turned it into the DBA of the company, Norada Real Estate Investments. And that's how Norada came to be. Now I have a whole slew of businesses and holding companies with the name Norada, just because it's a unique and brandable name, and I can just tie it in with everything. So, long story short, that's how the name came to be.
Yeah. Well, good question, Anonymous. Whoever you are, one day we'll know who you are. Seems like you attend these often.
Yeah.
You actually just click on that as an option when you register. So, well, listen, guys, a couple last things here before we hit the stop button today. Super simple to get started with Norada Capital. Okay, you can go to noradacapital.com/profile. Again, that's noradacapital.com/profile. And there's a 5-minute profile link you can fill out. Takes you 5 minutes to get started. Every investor I've ever worked with in the last 2 years has done this the same way. You fill out that profile form, and we go from there. We have a couple more. We have a
I just
couple
put
more.
it in the chat. I put the link in the
Perfect.
chat box so people can click directly from noradacapital.com/profile. It'll take you to that page,
Yep.
and it takes you like 1 or 2 minutes to fill out. And then you'll get a DocuSign immediately. You'll get the promissory note and all the disclosures and everything to
Yep.
review in like a minute or two. And so you can at least just review that and then talk to Nate or whoever your investment counselor is for more information, to answer more questions, uh, just to help you along with it.
Yeah. So that's it, guys. It's a super simple way to get started. I'm sure most of you guys, if you have extra questions, you can also go to noradacapital.com. And yeah, I saw those comments come in.
James is the comedian. I just named my future grandchild Norada. That's awesome.
Appreciate that, James.
Yeah, thanks, James. Not for
Nancy
us.
asked about a specific amount of money we're looking to raise. Good question, Nancy. I don't sit in the boardrooms with Marco, so I don't know what the answer to that question would be. Marco can speak more specifically to amounts, but
Yeah, the short answer to that, I'll just ballpark it for you because I'll actually have a very specific number for you, or for us, in about a week. In fact, we're just buttoning this up today. We had a meeting about it this morning. We're probably only raising another, don't quote me on this, but I'm just ballparking about 30 million, 25 to 30 million.
yeah,
We're reaching a tipping point. Like come next year, we're going to be at a tipping point where we're just going to start scaling back on our capital raising efforts and just start paying off notes as they mature, um, to just get rid of the debt stack.
yeah,
So there's some exciting things coming up in the weeks to come that I'm working on that I'll be sharing with my team first, and then on these webinars. So
perfect. Good question, Nancy. Yeah, Ben, to your question there, when will you stop offering notes? Probably in the next 12 to 24 months, I would think.
yeah, 12,
So,
12 to 18, but no longer than 24.
yeah,
Yeah.
good questions, guys. Again, check out the webinar chat box here, copy and paste whatever you want to from there before we end the webinar here. As far as getting started, noradacapital.com/profile, and fill out that profile form. We'll get an update there and notice once you do that, and we can keep the ball moving forward from there. Marco, as always, thanks for your time today, and we'll see you guys again next week.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you everybody for attending today.
All right, take care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Thank you.